They said she wouldn't survive the night. A storm howled. A girl broken and bleeding gave birth beside a dog. Not in a hospital, but in a barn under straw and shadows. And when Elias opened the door, he didn't find chaos. He found Kodiak, a war-worn German shepherd nursing not just puppies but a human baby. Was it instinct? Was it God? Or was it the one last chance for a man who'd lost everything to save someone else? The wind had been rising since late afternoon, ushering in the kind of damp cold that crawled into the bones and stayed there. The Smoky Mountains loomed gray and ancient beyond the skeletal tree line, while a thin mist snaked low over the fields, like breath held too long. Hollow Haven Ranch sat tucked in a narrow valley just outside the sleepy town of Wren Hollow, Tennessee, a place where the locals minded their own business and the hills held their silence. Elias Thorne hadn't been into town in over 6 weeks. He was a man carved from quiet with wide shoulders and a farmer's posture straight-backed from years of lifting more than grief could weigh. His hair, once sun-gold, had dulled to ash blonde, cropped close at the sides. A trimmed beard veiled a jaw too often clenched. He was 36, but the lines around his eyes made him look older, or maybe just tired. People in town whispered about him, with a kind of pity reserved for those who had lost too much and spoken too little since. 3 years ago, Elias had buried his wife Maura. Cancer. The kind that strikes fast and cruel. They had only been married 4 years. Since then, he'd retreated into the ranch, living off the land, rebuilding fences, repairing sheds, and letting the silence grow tall around him. The only soul he kept close was Kodiak. Kodiak was a German shepherd of rare bearing, 6 years old with thick sable and cream fur and keen amber eyes that saw more than most men. He moved like smoke over grass, quiet and watchful. Once he'd served alongside Elias in Afghanistan, trained to detect explosives, but after the war they'd both returned home changed. Elias adopted him permanently, and the two had been inseparable since. While Elias wrestled with the weight of memory, Kodiak became both shield and mirror, silent, loyal, scarred in ways no one asked about. That evening, as the storm rolled in from the northwest, Elias sat on the front porch oiling the hinges of an old lantern, his boots propped against the railing. The sun was gone behind low clouds, and the first flecks of sleet danced in the wind. Kodiak stood at the edge of the yard, ears perked, eyes fixed on something in the distance. "You smell it?" Elias asked, not expecting an answer. Kodiak didn't move. Something was off. Elias stood, set the lantern aside, and whistled low. "Come on, boy, let's get in." But Kodiak didn't respond. He bolted, not in play, not in panic, just gone. A blur of fur through the orchard and into the woods, silent as a ghost. Elias ran after him, boots crunching over frostbitten grass, heart pounding not from exertion, but fear. "Kodiak," he called into the dusk, but the wind tore the name away. The woods behind the ranch were dense and sloped upward toward a narrow ridge. The path was overgrown but familiar. Elias followed the trail as far as he could before the cold air stole the feeling from his fingers. He paused at the edge of a hollow, a natural dip between 2 ridgelines, and listened. Nothing. Only the groan of tree limbs and the creak of a rusted windmill turning slow back at the ranch. Elias waited for a bark, a rustle, any sign of Kodiak, but the dog had vanished. By the time he returned home, the sleet had turned to snow. He lit the wood stove, hung his coat by the fire, and stood there jaw tight, staring at the door, as if willing Kodiak to walk back through it. But the door stayed shut. Outside, the storm howled. Morning crept in gray and reluctant, dragging its light across the snow-laced fields of Hollow Haven like a painter with a faded brush. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a fragile stillness, and the kind of silence that made every sound feel louder than it should. The woods behind the ranch were blanketed in white, and icicles clung to the eaves of the barn like teeth. Elias hadn't slept. He'd stoked the fire until it was nearly embers, pacing between the window and the porch eyes, scanning for Kodiak. His coat still hung by the door, wet and stiff from the chase last night. By dawn, worry had hardened into something else, resolve. He saddled up, wrapped himself in wool and canvas, and headed out with a lantern in one hand and a .22 rifle in the other. He started with the orchard, then combed the west pasture, calling out Kodiak's name every few hundred feet. Nothing. No paw prints, no broken trail, only snow and silence. As he made his way to the barn, the last place he hadn't checked, Elias noticed something strange. The door was cracked open. He hadn't left it that way. The lantern light flickered across the hay-strewn floor as he stepped inside. The scent hit him first, blood, and something else, wet fur milk and the sharp metallic hint of new life. "Kodiak," he called softly. A rustle from the farthest stall made him raise the lantern higher. What he saw stopped him cold. Kodiak lay curled in the straw, his thick body hunched protectively. Around him squirmed a litter of tiny damp puppies, 6, maybe 7. But in the center of them, nestled into Kodiak's flank, was not a puppy. It was a baby, a newborn, human. Red-faced eyes, closed mouth, working gently against Kodiak's side, as if nursing. Elias's heart seized. He moved forward in slow, stunned steps, unable to speak. The infant's skin was pale and wrinkled umbilical cord still clinging to her belly. She was wrapped in a flannel shirt torn old and soaked with birth. A girl. He could see that clearly now. Kodiak raised his head, eyes alert but calm. He didn't growl, didn't shift, just stared at Elias with an expression that could only be called trust. Then a voice broke the stillness behind him. "Please don't take her." Elias spun around, rifle instinctively rising. A figure stepped from the shadows behind the hay bales. A young woman, maybe early 20s, thin to the point of gauntness, her cheeks hollow and her red hair matted to her face with sweat. She wore a faded denim jacket over a floral dress, both stained with blood and straw. Her boots, at least 2 sizes too big, flopped with each step as she limped into the light. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. "I'm sorry." Elias didn't lower the rifle right away. "Who are you?" She winced, clutching her side. "Delaney? Delaney Quinn?" He scanned her trembling hands, split lip, a bruise blooming along her jawline. Not fresh, not from childbirth. "You had that baby in my barn?" Delaney nodded, voice cracking. "Last night, during the storm. I couldn't make it anywhere else." Elias stared at her. Why here I was running. My ex, he was close. He said if I had the baby, he'd kill her. I had to get away. Her voice cracked. "I saw your porch light. I thought maybe someone lived here who wouldn't ask too many questions." Her legs gave out. She collapsed to her knees in the straw, sobbing soundlessly, arms hanging limp at her sides. Elias exhaled. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered the rifle and slung it behind his back. The warmth had begun to return to his fingers, but his thoughts were ice. He stepped toward the infant, knelt, and gently touched her tiny back. The baby made a soft sound, more breath than cry, and Kodiak shifted slightly to let Elias in. He wrapped the girl in the rest of the flannel, then stood. "We're going to the house." Delaney looked up, startled. "You're letting us stay?" "Right now that baby needs heat, and you look like you're about to fall over. So, yes. But we talk later." Elias carried the child close to his chest. Delaney followed, unsteady, clutching the barn wall for balance. Inside the house, warmth enveloped them. Elias moved quickly. He stoked the fire, filled a basin with warm water, and grabbed a soft towel from the linen cupboard. He laid the baby on a folded quilt by the hearth, checking her breathing. It was shallow but steady. Delaney stood by the door, still trembling. "Sit," he ordered, pointing to the worn armchair near the fire. "You need fluids. I'll make tea." She obeyed, curling into herself like a child. Her eyes were glassy, lips chapped. "Is she okay?" she asked hoarsely. Elias looked at the infant. "She's alive. That's more than I expected to find in my barn today." He didn't ask questions, not yet. He made black tea, set out honey and crackers, then sat across from her. Delaney took the cup in both hands, grateful. Her fingers were raw and covered in small cuts. "I didn't want to leave her," she whispered, "but I was afraid he'd follow. I thought, if the dog took her, maybe someone would find her. You let a dog nurse your baby. I didn't let it happen. It just did." She blinked. "Kodiak. That's his name, right?" He came close, lay down beside me. I passed out. When I woke up, he was curled around her. Elias didn't know what to say. Kodiak had always been intelligent, but this was something else. "Do you have any idea what could have happened?" "Yes," Delaney said. "But she's alive, and I think it's because of him." Outside, the wind had stilled. Inside, the house no longer felt like it only belonged to ghosts. The fire had burned low by the time the baby, still unnamed, finally drifted into a deep, warm sleep, cocooned in Elias's old flannel and tucked inside a makeshift cradle by the hearth. Kodiak lay beside her, with his head resting between his paws, alert but still. Elias sat across the room, arms folded, eyes steady on Delaney Quinn. The young woman looked smaller in the amber glow of the firelight, her frame hunched beneath a wool blanket he had draped over her shoulders earlier. Her face was pale, the bruising along her cheek, now more visible in the light, along with a thin scar that ran from just under her right ear to the edge of her jawline, a scar that didn't look fresh, but rather old and poorly healed. Delaney caught him staring and offered a tired, bitter smile. "Carter gave me that one," she said quietly as if reading his mind. "Second year in, it was during an argument over nothing, his tie maybe, or the way I made the coffee." Her voice trembled on the edge of sarcasm, but her eyes betrayed no amusement. Elias didn't respond at first. He'd seen wounds like that before, overseas and at home. But this was different. This wasn't war, it was domestic, intimate. The kind of violence that wore a mask and left no trail outside the skin. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Carter Dade." She nodded. "You've heard of him. Anyone who's lived in Tennessee longer than a year's heard of the Dades. Construction empire. Real estate. Politicians in their back pocket. Exactly," she muttered. "His father owns half of Nashville, and Carter acts like he owns the rest. No one ever says no to him." Her voice thinned. "Until I did." Delaney's hair had begun to dry and curl at the ends red gold like copper wire. She tucked a damp strand behind her ear and sighed, wrapping the blanket tighter around her. "I met him at a gallery opening in Memphis. I was 20, bright-eyed, naive. I was painting then abstract stuff. Not great, but I believed in it." Elias listened motionless. He was charming, confident, said all the right things, said I had a soul like a brush stroke. I should have known that line was stolen. She laughed once bitterly. He bought 2 paintings, took me to dinner, then into his world, like it was nothing. Fast cars, diamond earrings, front row at the symphony. And then I stopped painting. She paused, staring into the flames. I wasn't allowed to anymore. He said it distracted me. Said I was wasting my time, that I belonged by his side. And when I tried to push back, well, you can guess. Elias nodded once slow. "I didn't leave until I got pregnant," Delaney said, voice barely above a whisper. "That's when he changed completely. Told me if I didn't get rid of it, he'd make sure the baby didn't live past its first night. And I believed him. God help me, I believed every word." Elias stood abruptly, walking to the kitchen. He needed to move. He boiled water, pulled down a tin of chamomile tea, and leaned on the counter, staring at his own reflection in the dark window. Behind him, Delaney sat in silence. Kodiak stirred and lifted his head, eyes following Elias. He returned with the tea and handed it to her. "You should sleep soon." "I won't," she said. "Not for a while. Not until I know you're not going to kick me out." Elias sat again, slower this time. "I'm not throwing you out?" Delaney looked at him, disbelieving. "Why?" He thought for a moment before answering. "Because I've lost people before. I know what it feels like to be abandoned when you're most afraid. And that baby." His eyes drifted toward the fire, where the infant slept soundly, Kodiak curled around her like a sentry. She didn't ask for any of this. Delaney blinked rapidly. "I don't even know what to name her," she murmured. "I wanted something strong, something that meant survival," Elias thought. "What about juniper, hardy little tree, roots deep even in rocky soil?" Delaney looked at him in surprise, then smiled, genuine and fragile. "Juniper," she whispered. "Yes." "That fits." Across the room, Kodiak shifted tail, thumping softly against the wood floor. "Does he always do that?" she asked. Elias tilted his head. "What stays so close? Watch over her like that." Elias's eyes warmed slightly. "He's got a sense about people. He knew you weren't a threat, and he's always had a thing for protecting the small and helpless." Delaney smiled at the dog. "He's more of a father than Carter ever would be." At that, Elias stood again and moved toward the door. "I'm going to check the perimeter. Make sure no one followed you. You said Carter was close last night." Delaney straightened. "Yes. I ditched the car about a mile from here and walked. I thought I'd lost him in the storm, but he doesn't give up easy, neither do I," Elias said, pulling on his coat. He grabbed the rifle from the corner, gave one last glance at the baby Juniper, and stepped into the night. Outside, the clouds hung low and heavy, pressing against the spines of the Smoky Mountains like a weight refusing to lift. The wind whispered through the naked trees, stirring ash in the fire pit Elias had long stopped using. He stood near the edge of the orchard fence, one boot resting on the lowest rail, Kodiak beside him, still quiet, ever watchful. The scent of smoke, ghost-like and distant, carried him backward through time. Kandahar, 2015. The heat had been unbearable that day, the air thick with dust and sweat. Elias was one of 4 clearing a path through the remains of a bombed-out village. Kodiak younger then moved ahead with the ease of a shadow, his nose to the ground, his body low and tense. Elias had always trusted the dog's instincts. That day, it saved his life. Kodiak stopped near a cluster of stones. His tail froze mid-sweep. A low growl rumbled from his throat. Elias barely had time to react before the blast hit violent, blinding, brutal. The shockwave threw him to the ground, shrapnel tearing through his leg helmet, torn away vision, blurred by dust and blood. He remembered waking to pain, and Kodiak's teeth at his jacket dragging him inch by inch away from the crater, ignoring the blood streaming from his own ear. The dog never made a sound, just pulled. 2 men died that day. Elias didn't. Because of him. After the hospital, the rehab and the silence that followed Elias returned to Tennessee. He brought Kodiak with him. But the war hadn't left them. Not entirely. The dog would startle at thunder, disappear under beds when fireworks cracked the sky. There were nights when he stood at the door growling at nothing. Other nights, Elias would find him pacing in circles, chest-heaving eyes wild. The vet called it combat trauma. He remembers too much, she had said gently. Elias understood. He remembered too much too. And that was why, as he stood now in the fading morning light, watching Kodiak guard the yard like a soldier still on patrol, he didn't stop him, didn't call him back inside. Because Elias knew some battles never ended, they just changed shape. He knelt beside the dog, rested one hand on his thick, scarred neck. "You're not broken," he said softly. "You're just carrying more than most." Kodiak didn't move, but his ears flicked, catching Elias's voice. "Me too," Elias whispered. They sat like that for a long while, man and dog, 2 soldiers no longer at war, yet still surrounded by shadows. Not all strange things were to be feared, Elias thought. Some, like the dog who had pulled him from fire and the woman who'd just arrived in a storm, were miracles in disguise. The next 2 days passed under skies the color of wet slate. Rain came in pulses sometimes, a soft drizzle, other times a harsh drumbeat on the tin roof. Elias spent most of his time patching the north fence and reinforcing the gate with an iron crossbar he hadn't touched in years. Kodiak, though calm on the surface, had returned to his old habits, circling the perimeter, ears always tuned to the slightest crackle in the brush. Inside the house took on the rhythm of new life. Delaney was healing slowly, though. Her steps still betrayed the ache in her hips. She moved through the kitchen in borrowed flannel, and Elias's thick socks hair tied back with a shoelace. Eyes always on Juniper, who now responded to the world with little fists and tiny sounds. Elias didn't speak much, but he listened, and he noticed how Delaney checked every lock before bed, how her hand hovered protectively over Juniper's chest at night, feeling for breath, how she flinched at the sound of vehicles on the gravel road no matter how distant. So, when the knock came, it was like thunder on dry ground. 3 hard raps, sharp, clean, precise. Elias was on his feet instantly. Kodiak rose with him, body stiff, ears forward, a growl deep in his throat. Delaney froze where she stood at the sink, one hand still in a bowl of rinsed apples. Elias grabbed the rifle from the corner. He opened the door just a crack enough to see not enough to be seen. The man on the porch looked like he'd stepped out of a political ad. Carter Dade, tall, well-groomed, early 30s, with a square jaw and expensive boots. His trench coat was tailored a deep navy blue, and his dark hair slicked back from a face that wore charm like a mask. His eyes, however, were reptilian, flat and calculating. "Mr. Thorne Carter said, with a polished southern drawl. "Pleasure to meet you." Elias didn't move. "What do you want?" Carter raised both hands, slightly smiling, as if this were all very cordial. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Elias's grip on the rifle didn't tighten, but it didn't relax either. "I don't know who you are," Elias said. "And I don't care. You need to leave." Carter chuckled. "Delaney's here, isn't she? And the baby? My daughter? He said it with emphasis like a claim. Behind Elias, Kodiak growled again. Carter's eyes flicked toward the sound and narrowed. I'm here as a gentleman, he continued, voice calm. No lawyers, no drama. I just want to see my child. You're not welcome, Elias said evenly. Carter stepped forward. Look, I don't know what she told you, but Delaney has a habit of spinning stories. She's fragile, emotional. You can't believe everything. Get off my land. Carter's smile faltered. I don't want trouble, he said, adjusting his cufflinks. But let's not pretend this is over. That girl's mine, and I always get what's mine. The last line hit the air like a slap. Elias didn't speak. He simply raised the barrel of the rifle and pointed it low, deliberate a warning. Carter's smile vanished entirely. All right, he said after a long pause. You want to play hero? Fine. But understand this, Thorn. She'll come back to me. They always do. He stepped backward, slow and measured, then turned and walked to a sleek black BMW parked beneath the trees just beyond the gate. Gravel crunched beneath his boots. The car pulled away in silence, tires cutting a wet trail down the road. When the engine faded, Elias stepped back inside and locked the door. He turned to find Delaney standing in the hallway, her face pale, her lips trembling. Juniper was cradled in her arms, wrapped in a quilt, completely unaware. You saw him? She whispered. Elias nodded. He won't get past me. Her knees buckled slightly and she leaned against the wall. He's going to try again, she said. He always does. Elias stared at her, something hard settling behind his eyes. Then I'll be ready. The snow returned in the quiet hours before dawn, blanketing Hollow Haven in a pale hush. Fat flakes drifted through the pines coating the roof and wrapping the landscape in false serenity. Inside the farmhouse, the wood stove pulsed low heat through the rooms, casting a faint orange glow that reached the edges of the nursery. Elias didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table, boot still on rifle laid across his lap. Kodiak dozed beside the back door, one eye half open, his breath slow but alert. Every so often Elias's gaze drifted to the baby monitor on the counter, a small speaker that hummed with Juniper's steady breathing. Delaney had insisted on keeping the lights dim. He watches, she had whispered earlier. He waits for things to go quiet. Elias believed her. So, he waited too. At 2:19 a.m., Kodiak's head snapped up. The change was instant. His ears perked, body rigid, a growl rumbling low in his throat. Elias stood without a word. The air in the house changed. Heavy, electric. A faint crunch outside boots on frozen snow. Then another. 2 sets, maybe 3. Elias moved to the window, keeping low, and peered through a gap in the curtains. 3 figures. One large, broad-shouldered, moving with confidence, Carter. 2 others, thinner, more cautious. One held a crowbar. They were heading for the back entrance. Elias moved swiftly to the breaker box and flipped the outer lights off. Darkness swallowed the yard. Then he slipped to the coat rack and pulled out a small red canister bear spray hooked to a belt loop from his hiking days. Kodiak, he whispered, pointing to the hallway. Stay with her. But the dog didn't move. Instead, he turned to Elias with a stubborn look and a low huff, as if to say, not this time. Elias exhaled. All right, with me then. They slipped out the front door, circling wide around the house, boots crunching just enough to draw attention. The intruders froze when they heard it too late. Elias stepped from behind the shed with the rifle leveled. Step away, he said. Now! Carter turned, his smile visible even in the dark. Didn't think you'd be awake? You thought wrong. One of the goons, a wiry man in a green hoodie face, pocked with acne scars, lunged toward the side fence. Kodiak launched forward, a blur of fur and muscle, and took the man down with a growl that split the night. The man screamed, arms flailing. Call him off, Carter barked, but Elias didn't move. I warned you, Elias said, voice low. Then he heard it, a whine. Kodiak's body tensed mid-fight. He staggered sideways, tongue-lolling eyes unfocused. The man on the ground scrambled away, shrieking. Kodiak. Elias ran forward as the dog collapsed beside him, legs twitching. Carter laughed, a dry, triumphant sound. They said it'd take about 10 minutes. Guess we were early. You poisoned him. Just a little help to even the odds, Carter said. But you made this harder than it needed to be. Elias didn't answer. His hands were already beneath Kodiak's head, checking for breath, pulse, anything. The dog's eyes fluttered. His chest rose slow but shallow. "You think this makes you a man?" Elias growled, rising to his full height. "You come in the dark. You bring poison. And you think that's power." Carter's expression faltered. Then came the sound of a gun being cocked from behind. Delaney stood in the open doorway holding a small revolver with both hands, her arms trembling, but her eyes steady. "Step away from him," she said. Carter turned slowly. "Delaney," he said, soft and patronizing. "Put that down before you hurt yourself." "I already did," she said, "when I let you touch me the first time." For a second, Carter didn't move. Then his smile cracked. "You're not going to shoot the father of your child, no?" she said, her voice breaking. "But I'll shoot the man who came here to kill the only thing that's ever protected her." He stepped back. That was all Elias needed. He raised the rifle. "Run!" The men ran, all three of them. The one Kodiak had taken down limped hard, clutching a bleeding arm. Carter didn't look back. Elias didn't chase them. He dropped to his knees beside Kodiak. The dog was shaking now, barely breathing. "Delaney," he shouted. "Call Clara! Tell her I'm coming!" Snow still covered the land, like a wound scabbed over white but tender beneath. The sun returned weakly the morning, glinting off fence posts and frozen puddles, casting Hollow Haven Ranch in a cold but golden light. Inside the house, the silence was not fearful. It was waiting, watching. Elias sat beside Kodiak, who lay stretched out on an old quilt in front of the fire. The dog's breathing had steadied, but his eyes remained half closed, and his limbs twitched from the remnants of the toxin. A makeshift IV courtesy of Clara Bell hung from a coat hook above Drip, feeding him fluids with slow determination. It had been a long night. Clara Bell, though older and creaky in her knees, had driven through snow-covered back roads in record time. The former field medic had arrived with a canvas bag full of supplies, and the same no-nonsense tone Elias remembered from his teenage years. "Don't get sentimental now," she had muttered while inserting the IV. "He's still got a fight left. But if I find out this was antifreeze or something store-bought and not controlled sedative, I'm driving to town and raising hell." Now, 12 hours later, Kodiak still lived. Delaney walked softly through the house, Juniper bundled in her arms, swaddled in 2 blankets. Her eyes, rimmed with exhaustion, were alert. She hadn't slept since the attack, but there was something new in the way she moved, an edge of quiet resolve. She had faced Carter, had raised a weapon against him, and she hadn't backed down. Elias heard the truck before he saw it, gravel cracking under the weight of old tires. He rose slowly and looked through the front window. A blue Ford sheriff's vehicle pulled up the drive. Silas Grant stepped out, his breath clouding in the cold. He was in his early 40s, tall with a football player's build that had softened over the years. His sandy hair was trimmed short beneath a worn hat, and his badge was polished but dented. Silas had the eyes of a man who'd seen too much but never let it harden him. He was Elias's childhood friend and former comrade in arms, 2 years in Iraq, before Silas left the military and took a quieter path back home. Now he was the law in Wren Hollow. Elias opened the door before Silas knocked. "Took you long enough," Elias said. Silas smiled grimly. "Had to finish my morning coffee before riding into a war zone." Elias stepped aside. "He was here." "I figured," Silas replied, glancing down at the bloody paw prints in the snow. "Clara called me after she left. Said someone poisoned your dog and tried to break in. He brought help. One of them had a crowbar. Kodiak took him down before the stuff kicked in." Silas let out a low whistle. "And you?" "I made it clear they weren't walking in." Silas looked toward the fire, saw Kodiak, and removed his hat respectfully. "Damn good dog." "Best I've ever known," Elias said. Delaney appeared in the doorway, holding Juniper tightly. Silas turned to her, nodding. "Miss Quinn," he said. "I'm Sheriff Grant. I'd like to talk to you about pressing charges." Delaney hesitated. "He'll get out. He always does." "Not this time," Silas said. "What he did last night qualifies as attempted home invasion, use of a controlled substance on an animal, and depending on what you tell me, possibly attempted kidnapping." She swallowed. "You believe me, I do. But I don't just need belief. I need a statement. I need documentation. You ready to do that?" Delaney looked at Elias, then at Juniper, who blinked up at her sleepily. "Yes," she said. "I am." They sat down at the table, Silas clicking on a small recorder. Delaney spoke calmly, clearly more confident than Elias had ever seen her. She described the years of abuse, the threats, the moment she fled. She explained the birth in the barn, the dog who saved her child, and the night Carter came back. When she finished, Silas leaned back and blew out a breath. "Well," he said, "that's enough to keep him off the streets for a while, especially if we find his fingerprints on your property." "You will," Elias said. He touched the back gate, and one of the men bled on the snow. Kodiak bit clean through. Silas smiled. "Perfect." As Silas packed up, he turned to Elias. "By the way, you ever think about making things official?" Elias raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean Delaney and the baby. They're here. You're raising her. You already have Clara vouching for you. Why not adopt her?" Elias was quiet. Delaney looked up. You'd do that." He looked at Juniper, who yawned and stretched in her mother's arms. Then he nodded. "Yes," he said. "I would." Silas gave a satisfied nod. "I'll start the paperwork this week." By the time the sheriff's truck disappeared down the drive, the sun had risen high enough to melt the edge of the snow. Elias stood on the porch with Delaney beside him, Kodiak watching from the doorway. "He's getting stronger," she said. "He's got a reason to," Elias replied. And for the first time in years, he meant it. 1 year passed. The valley wore its December crown, well-soft mounds of snow, blanketing fence posts, the old barn roof glistening under the pale sun, smoke curling steadily from the farmhouse chimney. Hollow Haven had changed, but its soul remained steady. The wind still whispered between pines. The horses still pawed at the frost-bitten earth. But now, the silence no longer felt empty. It felt full. The porch had been swept clean that morning, revealing the old wood planks beneath a light dusting of snow. Twine-wrapped garlands of pine and rosemary were draped around the columns, and a row of mismatched chairs borrowed from neighbors had been arranged into 2 neat rows facing the front steps. At their center stood a wooden arch, hand-built by Elias, with the help of Silas and Clara, wrapped in dried wildflowers and ribbons Delaney had dyed herself with blackberries and bark. Inside the farmhouse was glowing. Clara Bell, ever the force of practicality wrapped in tenderness, moved from room to room, adjusting napkins, checking mugs, refilling pitchers. She wore a dusty rose dress and sturdy leather boots, her silver braid pinned up in a crown. There was flour on her cheek and a tear stain on her collar. "Stop fussing," Elias said from the hallway, trying to tie his navy blue tie with one hand, while cradling a freshly bathed Juniper in the other. "Everything looks good." "I'll stop fussing when I'm dead," Clara replied without looking up. "You've got raspberry jam on your shirt collar." "I what?" How Juniper let out a delighted squeal. Delaney emerged from the back bedroom then, and the house seemed to quiet in reverence. She wore a long-sleeved ivory-colored dress, simple cotton, with lace stitched by hand along the hem. Her hair was down loose curls tumbling past her shoulders, and pinned behind her left ear was a single sprig of juniper berries. Her makeup was soft, barely there, but her smile was unmistakable. Unafraid. Home. Elias stared at her a moment too long. Clara cleared her throat pointedly. "I'll take the baby now. If you 2 lovebirds can remember, you've got guests waiting." Outside, a small group had begun to gather. Silas stood by the arch now, sporting a dark green vest and jeans, both dusted lightly with snow. His wife Holly, a warm, round-faced woman with quick hands and a motherly tone, arranged thermoses of cider at a nearby table. She'd once been a trauma counselor. Now she volunteered every Tuesday at the new center. Behind them, 4 women survivors stood close together, each wearing scarves, knitted from yarn Delaney had hand-dyed. They were the first residents of Hollow Haven, the shelter Elias had built from the old horse stables. A space for women and their children, and for dogs like Kodiak, retired abandoned or broken in ways no one else wanted to mend. Speaking of him, Kodiak trotted out from behind the barn, tail held high. His coat had thickened again over the year, golden black and glossy, the winter sun catching at the silver around his muzzle. He moved slower now, but his stride was steady, eyes bright. A fresh leather vest had been fitted for him, bearing the words Guardian stitched in brown thread. Juniper spotted him from Clara's arms and laughed, reaching both hands toward the dog as he approached. Elias stepped down from the porch, his boots crunching in the snow. Delaney followed. The vows were simple. No officiant in black robes, just Clara standing between them, her voice warm and wry. Do you promise, she asked Elias, to stop working through dinner, to share your boots in winter, and to stop thinking you need to fix everything alone? I do, he said. And Delaney, do you promise to take deep breaths before you argue, to keep painting even when the dishes are stacked, and to remember that you are not what he did to you, but what you chose to become? I do. Juniper babbled from Clara's hip. Kodiak barked once. That settles it. Clara smiled. You're married. Laughter rippled across the small crowd. They kissed beneath the arch snow, falling in gentle flakes. No fanfare, just the warmth of witness. Later that afternoon, a fire crackled in the stone pit out back, and guests gathered on hay bales draped in wool blankets. Cider steamed in ceramic mugs, and fresh cornbread passed from hand to hand. Inside the house, in the nursery, Juniper dozed in a crib built by Elias himself, her tiny fingers' curled lips parted in dreams. At the doorway, Kodiak lay stretched across the rug facing the crib. He didn't sleep. He just watched, as always. And in that quiet, it was clear the impossible had happened. A man once broken, a woman once hunted, and a dog thought too far gone had built something whole again. Not perfect, but real, and that in Hollow Haven was more than enough. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come wrapped in lightning or thunder. They arrive in silence and snowfall, in a newborn's breath, or in the unwavering eyes of an old dog. Hollow Haven wasn't built in a day, and neither is healing. But when broken people choose to stand together, when love replaces fear, and when we give the lost a home, something sacred happens. We witness the hand of God moving through ordinary hands. Kodiak wasn't just a dog. He was a guardian sent at the perfect moment, just like Elias, just like Delaney. Maybe it was coincidence, or maybe it was grace. In everyday life, we are surrounded by those in need of shelter. Some carry bruises on their skin, others carry wounds in their spirit. This story reminds us, no matter how far gone someone may seem, no soul is beyond saving. If this story touched you, leave a comment below and type Amen to stand in prayer with us for those still fighting their way toward light. Share this with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of hope, healing, and divine timing. And may God bless you today and always.